Hi everyone, my name is Marcus and you're watching the Reef Nerd YouTube channel. So last week I announced that I'll be upgrading to a much bigger tank, and as a first step I need to decide what tank I'm going to go with. I ran through my initial shortlist of the top 5 options I could think of, and I asked the community for their thoughts and opinions. I got some really good feedback for all the options and a couple of ones that I'd not really considered in my list from my last video. If you haven't watched my last video, I'll put a link up here, you should go check it out. Just as a refresher, really the only thing that I had decided so far is that the new tank will sit in the exact same spot as the current one behind me here. And it will be somewhere between 1500 and 1800 millimeters in size. That's roughly double what I have now. The reason for that size limitation on the length is firstly because it needs to be able to work in the space that I have available here and look balanced. This goes a long way towards maintaining a pleasing aesthetic in this space, which is my living room, dining room, kitchen area. Secondly, anything bigger than 1800 would become difficult for me to service, as the scale of water change requirements would become a bit of a problem for me, given that I do live in an apartment and keeping a 1000 litre IBC out the back full of salt water is not really an option. I received some awesome feedback and comments regarding the options I ran through in the last video. I want to thank everyone who commented for your advice and feedback. Everyone was super positive and helpful. Overall, the 5 options were pretty much equally supported, and there were some suggestions for other options that I'd not previously covered, such as Red Sea. Some people really liked Cade, others like Neptunian Cube. There was good support for Waterbox as well. Some commenters were keen for me to wait for the Aquaforest tanks and be among the first to run with them as my system. However, for me, the comments that really stood out were those that gave me some really compelling insight for a custom tank or the Starfire Aquatics option. Essentially, what they made me think about is that I have developed over the last few years my own method of reefing. I suppose I have a moderate amount of knowledge, and I've seen enough success in my current tank, I think, to reflect that. Moving to my next tank, what I want is to continue my approach to reefing so that I can continue learning and fine-tuning my method, but scale it up. I want to have it integrated into my system from the beginning rather than bolted on and adapted to fit. What I mean by this is that I want a system that natively supports the equipment that I want to use, such as an algae turf scrubber and the Pacific Sun Core 7. I want a system that will easily accept the methods of reefing that I rely on, such as a calcium reactor and auto water change systems. Also, and perhaps most importantly, I want to end up with a piece of living art in my home that feels like it was meant to be there, which means the design and dimension of the cabinet and glass will need to be tailored to the particulars of its surroundings. YouTube commenter A. Borsey put it perfectly: custom or compromise. So to that end, whilst I'm sure I would see success and have an amazing tank in my home with any of the pre-made tank options I already covered, no system is out of the box 100% tailored exactly to my preferences, method, and requirements. I'm passionate enough about reefing that I don't want to compromise on anything, and as such, I've decided that I'll be embarking on the journey of a fully custom system, and I'll be working directly with Billy Holiday of Starfire Aquatics to build it. Now let's go through some of my considerations, challenges, and let me explain what's most important for me. One thing I don't really like about my current tank is that it's unable to be pushed back hard against the wall. The reason for this is that my apartment has these massive skirting boards that are over a foot high and protrude approximately 50 mil from the actual wall. It's for this reason that the wine cabinet I have sitting next to me over there has a large rear overhang on its bench top to enable it to be pushed back hard against the wall. This same feature I want built into the cabinet and frame of my new tank. Another thing that bugs me is the mismatched vertical alignment and depth alignment of all of these pieces. The kitchen bench, the supplementary cabinets, the tank cabinet, and the wine buffet all have different heights and depths. As I'll be removing this tank and its supplementary cabinets, I'll have the opportunity to have a new tank cabinet built exactly to match the wine cabinet height and depth, which will give me a much more aesthetically pleasing flow to the whole area. At some point in the medium term, I am planning to do some renovations to my kitchen, which means its styling could change. However, most of the furniture within this room matches this wine cabinet. Also, I have a dining room table, a TV cabinet and a bookshelf made with the same chestnut hardwood. My wife and I like this furniture and have no plans to change any of it. So it makes sense that the fish tank cabinet will be made to the same style with the same thick hardwood framed border that the wine cabinet has. Thinking about the internals of the cabinet, what I would like to have is more dry space. With my current tank, there's really only a small strip that I somehow managed to squeeze 3 separate reactors into with a hovering power section above that. This is par for the course with a 3-foot tank. However, doubling the size of the tank doesn't mean that you need to double the size of the sump. Whilst it will be bigger, there will be much more space for a fully dry section within the cabinet, and this will allow me to keep things like my calcium reactor within the cabinet of the tank and not in a separate cabinet to the side. Moving upwards, thinking about the tank itself, we need to consider where to place the Overflow and Weir. In general, there are 3 options: left, right, or middle. I asked myself whether I use the left and right viewing panels of my current tank, and the answer is yes, quite a lot. In fact, my rockwork scape was initially designed specifically to have good variance of depth and an offset footprint to specifically allow for nice viewing angles from all sides. I don't want to change this, and I think it goes a really long way to making the coral scape look natural. That means the lowest impact place to put a weir with the least impact on viewing panels and the most flexibility for internal plumbing to the sump is going to be a middle weir, keeping it as thin as possible while still housing all the necessary drain and return plumbing. That'll be a challenge for Billie Holiday. For tank dimensions, we have total flexibility down to the millimeter. So as I described earlier, I'll be wanting to match the existing furniture for depth and height, and for length I'll go with something as wide as I can fit in between the kitchen bench and the wine cabinet, which has about another additional foot of space over there against the wall that I can reclaim if necessary. This lands the total width to be somewhere in the realm of 1650 to 1750 millimeters. And the final cabinet design will inform the final exact measurement. That now brings us to tank height. There is a lot to consider here. A deeper tank allows more space for interesting aquascapes, coral growth, more interesting fish swimming patterns. Visually, tanks tend to be more impressive and fantastic to look at as they get deeper, especially when the rim gets around eye level. In fact, eye level seems to be the tipping point of sorts for where your perception of a tank changes. But tank depth needs to be carefully considered from a maintenance and lighting viewpoint as well. Make the tank too deep and the bottom becomes too dim, which makes coral choices difficult, and working on the tank also becomes vastly more difficult as soon as you can no longer reach the bottom of the tank with the length of your arm. When I'm standing up straight, the floor to my eyeline area is about 1600 millimeters. Minus the height of the wine cabinet, which is about 860 millimeters, means that the tank would need to be about 744 mil deep to be at my eyeline. Now, if I put a measuring tape to my armpit and pull it to my fingertips, we get approximately 650 millimeters. So I won't be able to easily reach the bottom. But if we account for glass thickness, the sandbed thickness, we might gain back approximately 50 or 60 mil. Now we're getting closer to my arm length, but we also need to remember that the waterline won't be at the absolute top of the tank. So with sufficient height, perhaps provided by a small stepping stool, I'll be able to reach over the tank and have my fingertips in the sandbed, with the waterline hopefully being just before my armpit. I'll play around with this a bit more, but based on the scenario I just explained, it seems likely to me that I'll want a tank to be approximately 700 millimeters deep, or thereabouts. At that depth, I'll also need to see how well my current lighting solutions will perform and what considerations may need to be made around that if changes to my lighting is required. Finally, on the topic of lighting, I would also like to design some form of hood or canopy cabinet space which will house all my lighting. It will be built into the ceiling here and will need to overhang out beyond this mezzanine that's above me an extra foot or so to cover the entire footprint of the new tank. I don't want it to come down too far, such that it leaves an air gap of at least 220 ml space between its bottom and the top of the tank. It will need to feature doors and panels, ideally motorized, so that it allows full access into the canopy to service the lighting. Additionally, it will need to be designed to match the decor so that it looks the part and achieves that all-important wife approval factor. Having a canopy will also allow me to be much more flexible with lighting options in the future if I want to run or trial different lights. So there's obviously a heap more to consider when it comes to designing the custom tank. I'll be sitting down with the team at Starfire Aquatics in a future video so you can hear all the benefit of some of their advice and expertise as we go through the design process. But for now, hopefully you have some understanding of the things that have driven my decision to go custom. Let me know your thoughts on this project. Any ideas or suggestions you might have are most welcome, so please post them in the comments down below. Also, while you're down there, don't forget to subscribe to the channel so you can follow along on the whole journey of this project. My name is Marcus, and you've been watching the Reef Nerd YouTube channel. Bye for now.